Okay, before we begin, just a disclaimer. I'm not a mechanic or auto electrician, and I'm doing this work for the first time. It's the 12th of December, 2019, so nearly Christmas. So, okay, back to the fuel pressure problem. What I've decided to do is get an Edelbrock fuel pump, remove this stock standard fuel pump that within 10 minutes the fuel pressure goes down to zero. It's got nothing to do with the fuel overheating or anything. I think it's just the OEM fuel pump just isn't sufficient. Probably never has been. Probably why people were pulled over on the side of the road in the 70s with their cars not working. So the next move is to remove the fuel pump. This is the fuel pump we're looking at. Edelbrock. There's a number here. That's it there. Okay. So if you wanted to read all about it, probably pause the picture. I'll just scan around the box. Just try and get rid of the glare from the light. And we'll take it from there. Okay, the Edelbrock produces 6 psi and it doesn't need a fuel pressure regulator. So let's turn it over. That has to be clocked so that the you can move the bottom part around to line up with your fuel lines. So that's it there for the other side. Okay, there is a procedure for rotating this, the back of it, or the underneath. Apparently you have to get a metal bar and bend this down so that it's in the full position. And so I'll look into that now. Okay, from the instructions we know that when we put this back on, when we redo the screws up, we've got to hold this this lever down. So look, I'll just rip straight into it. One thing that's not really confidence inspiring is this this gasket here. It looks like this is on a thread and they've tightened it up on this gasket. So there's actually 2 gaskets to fail. I've read that this is a very good quality product, however, so anyway, I'll keep going. Just trying to get that to focus. So that's what I'm using. I'm thinking you probably should loosen them all off. Probably leaving one in isn't the best idea, but anyway. Okay, so that's what we're looking at on the inside. Okay. And there's the diaphragm. It's a fairly big diaphragm. I can't really see any that there would be too much difference between that and the stock standard one, to be honest. Okay. Keep focusing that. that it will press in and out. Okay, so I think that I'll work out whether it's got to be there or there in a sec. So looking behind the diaphragm, I just see a spring down in there and a metal shaft, you could call it. Okay, so it says before fully tightening these screws, the rocker arm must be actuated to and held in the full stroke position. So that's got to be the full stroke position. It hasn't moved, so it's all the way back up toward the diaphragm. This is done to ensure that the diaphragm will be pulled to and held in its maximum working or flexed position while the retaining screws are being torqued to 25 to 30. Okay, so the positions I've got to choose from is there and there. So this is where it's got to be. So you might be able to see that better on that angle. So that's one position I've got. That's too far rotated around that way. And the other, I got this from Rocket in Sydney. Rocket's the name of the business. The cost was $250 delivered. Yeah, the camera just ran out. So I was just saying that the positions I've got, one is there, and the next one around is there. So hang on a minute, I'll go one more there. So line these up, that's probably it. I don't believe this. Every second hole has a thread in it. So this doesn't have a thread. This does, this doesn't, and this does. Well, where I need it positioned, there's no thread there, so it can only really be there or there. So let's see, there, all the way around there. That's not going to work because my metal line won't line up. Yeah, so that's the two positions I've got to choose from. Is there, that's too far forward this way, and the next one is there, and it's too far forward this way. I mean, honestly, would it really not, can't they just have a hole in every one instead of every second one, and just put a thread in every single hole underneath? I can rotate this. No, I can't. Okay. Okay, I've done a bit of research, and apparently you can turn this diaphragm. So I see now that you can. I'm just pushing it down as I turn. So I turn it, and then I'm pushing it down, and something seems to be moving on the mechanical side of it. Okay, that's it. It now lines up with the other hole. However, now I do have to put a thread or tap the every second hole. Just like to make the point that it's better. This type of work is better off done in the factory, not in people's garages. You know, you do generate a lot of metal filings or aluminium. That can get down in there in the bowl, and you know, that's not good. It's got to be flushed out. From my addiction to these old 1970s vehicles, I do hoard tools. I'll see them and I'll buy them. And I did snap this up. I think it was fairly cheap. So that's a tap and die set. So we'll see what I've got. I need 10 by 32 NF, but that's definitely going to be something I've got to go to the shop for. Okay, we'll do an experiment with the clear hose. I do have the fuel pump, however I'm looking for a few pieces that I need to put it together. For the record, I do have Allen head bolts. Got some lock nuts. I've got some thread sealant. So yeah, that's where it's at. These have got the wrong type of head on the top of them, so yeah, a bit of hit and miss at the moment. I did get this fuel hose for when the fuel pump's connected. One thing I noticed is that this 10mm thread is very similar to the, I think it's 3/8. I'll demonstrate that. Okay, so we've got the advertised as 3/8 fuel connection. We'll call that either the wrong thread or a crush thread. And this is the 10mm. I got it at a hardware shop, and you can see that it's fairly similar, or it's possibly a better match. So that goes in about 4 mil, say. I didn't show on camera that. 1, 2, and 3. And the other one we've got, let's get it started. So 1, 2, and 3. Yep. However, the threads, they don't match, right? Somehow I might be able to refocus that. Get a bit sharper definition there. Okay, I undid the top and bottom part of the fuel pump to be clocked. That's when you turn the angle of the inlet and outlet. That's the screw that was supplied. So I got the screws out of the 6 holes here. There were 6 screws. Unfortunately, what I found then was every second hole has a thread. So in other words, every second hole has no thread, and so that limits the angle you can adjust it with a thread. So for instance, there's a hole there and a thread there. However, if I wanted to turn it this little bit here, there's a hole there but no thread on that one. That may not possibly show up this time, but as the film gets on, you'll probably be able to see there's a thread there and there's no thread there. I don't know if I got that right, so there's actually no thread on that one, and there seems to be thread on that one. Okay, with the camera in focus, there's thread there, but not only is there no thread on the next one across, but I can't turn that into, can't pass that through that hole. What I've decided to do with what's at my disposal is get 6 screws, Allen head screws, and I've got these nuts, but they're like nylon wash nuts, and it's going to be hard to turn the nut.
because as it says, this has to be in the full stroke position. So the full stroke position is down. However, there's a very strong spring there. Now, I'm thinking instead of trying to put this thing in a vise, I'm trying to focus that, by the way, and pushing that down with a lever, as they say you should do, probably the best thing to do is remove the spring and just make sure that's held in the down position. The thing about holding this in a vise is there's no way to really keep it in the vise. You know, that's round there. You say, well, I'll clamp it here, but then you've got this bit sticking out, and that's sticking out on a different angle. It's very, very hard without tightening it up too much and damaging it. So I'm thinking possibly the best thing to do is try and grab the spring down there and just try and ease it out like that. However, unfortunately, that will push down a bit easier, but not that much easier. Okay, so my screws will pass through the bottom, but the top, it's not wide enough, so I have to make those wider. Now I realise you are supposed to tap these holes, but with where I live, with what I have at my disposal, it'd take a month of Sundays to get the right tap or die for this work. Okay, this is labelled as an M5, and that passes through a 4.5mm hole pretty well perfectly. I beg your pardon, it's a 5mm drill bit, and that's the right size. Okay, I've got a metal plate just to protect the diaphragm, and I've got the holes marked where I've got to drill through. Okay, I'm being careful not to get any metal files inside, so I'm just sort of shaking that out on the way. And now I'll clean it out with some something like brake parts cleaner. At this point, this would actually be a fairly simple job if the manufacturers had just threaded each of these holes. Apart from how you're going to put this in a vise and pull this back without damaging the metal. Okay, that's the inlet. That's as far as it threads in. It could possibly be a crush type thread on purpose, or it's the wrong thread. It says the threads are 3/8 here, but of course there's 3/8 and 3/8. You know, I mean, how often the threads, or how far apart the threads are. Okay, and my outlet to the carburetor. So that would twist up to here, and that's it. You can't do this up too much because it'll crack the case. Okay, I've got this other type of nuts and bolts. I'm going to use this type of nut because it doesn't have a nylon lock washer on it. So hopefully it won't spin, and I'll be able to torque up the nut. Okay, so the torque spec for these nuts are 25 to 30 inch pounds. But these baggage weighing scales, they don't do inch pounds, they only do foot pounds. So 25 to 30 inch pounds, that equates to 2.5 foot pounds. And the torque wrench is at 2.5 foot pounds, and that's very little. So you are supposed to pull straight. So I'll just place that around that ridge there of the handle, try and get a reading there. So I'll let that reset. Okay, we'll try that again when it's on level. Set it back to 0 and so it's very close. It was on 2.5 before. Okay, we'll try it with the other one. Just set it back to 0, which it won't. It'll do it. Okay. Okay, so that's close enough for me. So we'll just find out how much that is. So that is, it's not much pressure at all. Okay, so again I've got my torque wrench. I've got a fitting there that this spline will go into, and then I've got my Allen head fitting there on the end. I've got my spark plug socket. And with that I can get my fuel pump, put it in there, and that'll bottom out the diaphragm. Okay, what I'm going to do now is just work some, just focus that, some thread locker into the nuts and thread. That's the baggage weight information. Okay, I've got a socket and a spanner, and they will fit the nut, beg your pardon, there on top or underneath. Point being, sometimes as you get into finishing off a job like this, it often gets a little bit ugly and dirty, and you want to have everything on hand that you may need. It's now a couple of weeks since I've done the clocking work for this fuel pump. Some of these spark plug sockets have got a rubber bit in the bottom, and the end can slip into that rubber like so, and it'll hold better. But what I wanted to say was, you can get these ratchet straps, and you could come over the top there, put both sides onto a nail, and tighten it down. So that's really quite sturdy in that that rubber bit down the bottom there. But sticking to the point, another thing you could do would be to again put 2 nails on either side and come down with a you could tighten it up and just try and use a hockey strap. Also, definitely put a good cushion underneath, or something padded, because chances are it will actually fall out and onto the ground. Okay, now at this stage I'll push the pump down or bottom it out, and I'll start tightening up the nuts and bolts. It's turning, unfortunately. Okay, let's got that one. It's turning. Okay, let's got that one. It's unfortunate, but sort of thing happens. Okay, let's try and hold that. Stop it from spinning. Okay, it's got that one. A bit uncomfortable. Fair amount of spring tension there. Okay, the rear one's slipping. Yep, I think that's got that one. Okay, so it's held in the fully bottomed out position. Quite uncomfortable. Make sure I've got them all started. Okay. Well, I think they're all started. Now, it's a tricky bit. I have to swap it over. To change position. Becoming quite heavy. Okay. Crisscross pattern. Okay. Oh, it's heavy. And this one. Okay, I think they're done. I can't hold it any longer. I think that's it. Okay. Okay, there it is. I did actually undo the bolts, believe it or not, and do it a second time. I think the first time was good though. And you'll see that when it's bottomed out, the surprisingly the diaphragm sticks out further. So that's how you would know if it's been clocked. It's sticking out more at the front. Focus that. Sticking out more at the front than the back.
Okay, but that was hard work. So again, am I satisfied with the amount of torque on that? Probably not. It's very, very light on. They are torquing up a little bit more now that they've had a bit of time to settle on the diaphragm. Yeah, it's surprising. They were torqued up, then they've backed off, so you might want to let it rest around for a day and then re-torque them, I suppose. But anyway, so yeah, that's how you clock a clockable mechanical fuel pump. It's got medium strength thread lock. So another angle there. That one's a bit longer, but they did turn. These did turn while I was doing up the nut. But I found that if you just jammed your fingernail up against them, or I did get a spanner once and just hold it in place while I tightened this up, and then it was fine. They do say not to tighten them up too much or you can damage the diaphragm. I suppose that does make sense. I've noticed that the fuel pump won't torque down a third time, so it's only that second time. So you'll see, we'll go around a few of them now and I'll demonstrate that it won't torque down anymore. So you'll need to torque it down twice. Okay, so that's the clocking very nearly done. Just got to get the spring back in. There's a nib there underneath inside the arm there. And I'll put the damage out so it can be seen just from the removal. It's no big deal. So now what I think I'll do is I'll just get a screwdriver up underneath there. I do have glasses on. I'm going to try and somehow push that in up over the underneath one there. Okay, so I've managed to push that in over the other nib now, and that's in place. It was not easy to see in there. The small lock nuts with the nylon on the inside would never have worked. Next I'll install the inlet, and the outlet. These were advertised as 3/8. They could possibly be. It doesn't seem to be any light in between those threads. This one here is the 10mm, as I've demonstrated before. So that, you can see just there, that's a different thread. But the diameter does seem the same. I'll just focus that. So goes in roughly the same and seems, you know, pretty much like a perfect fit.
compared to the 3/8. This does seem a little bit wider. Okay, I'm going to use some thread sealant on this. This is thread tape. That's the thinner stuff. There's not much there, but that's the thinner stuff and it's white. And this is the thicker stuff and it's pink. I'm not going to use this. There's a few reasons. I'll just show you how it's applied. So you thread it in that way. So it wants to go that way. No, it wants to go that way. So you apply it a little bit back from the edge. The reason being is you don't want any of this to get into your fuel line, and you have to wrap it around the right way so that it doesn't unravel as you turn it in. But the manufacturers are saying don't use this, use this thread sealant. If this got into your carburetor, it would probably just as a side story, I did use this thread lock, but this is about 2 or 3 months old now, and you can see that it's still sticky. It hasn't gone off at all. I got that at Bunnings, and it only works when it's in a compressed state, say a piece of thread in a nut and it's tightened up. I've actually got to go and clean up my hands now because this stuff not good. So beware, go to an auto parts shop for your thread sealant. Okay, this won't go in very far, so I've never used this stuff before, so I'm just going to apply a little bit around the edge. Okay, so it's back from the very edge, and I'll just thread it in. Make sure it goes in the right hole. That's got to be my exit. That's the right one there. So it's got a nice bead around the edge there. I won't tighten it up too much. I just sort of I'll seat it. Okay, that's a really good seat just there. It's got a crushed type thread. Probably not the right thread for it, but it should work. Okay, this L fitting, it's hard to tell whether it's going to do half a turn or 1.5 turns, but anyway, should be able to make it work. So I'm just going to coat those threads. Just trying not to get any on the inside. I want to shift it over to the outside threads there. That's a fair amount. I would like to work it over a bit there on that side. Okay. Oh, what have I picked up there? My God. Alright.
Well, anyway, they do say that truth is stranger than fiction. So, anyway, carrying on. Try and get a start on it somehow, some way. There we go. Okay, that's a really good bead around the outside there. So let's see how much I can turn it. It's got to face up, and that's as far as it's going to go. It's just vertically up. Okay, that's it. How does this go? I think, yeah, that's right. Lid on. I don't know how long it'll last now that it's got a hole in the top, but anyway, we'll see how it works. Okay, I'm just looking around for things to add to the video. That's the gasket that the fuel pump came with, and these two bolts. I don't know if the bolts will fit. They possibly may not. Okay, I'm going to end it here. Looks like we could get a storm. So, over and out. Okay, so it's now the 27th of the 1st, 2020. It's the next morning, and yep, we got a problem. I've come in to check my nice dry silicon, and that's right, it's as wet as when I put it on yesterday afternoon. So I've looked up on the internet, and apparently it's very confusing, different information. Some people say that it does go hard. Other people say that it's just a lubricant. They say you need to knead this bottle before application. Some people talk about a curing or a hardening agent, but it doesn't say anywhere here that it needs a hardening agent. Okay, that's what the tube says. Might be able to pause that if you've got the time to study it. And the packet. I don't think this is going to stand 10,000 psi somehow. It's only not much more than a liquid. I will pan down there, down the box the tube came in. This is another type of thread sealant. Got that at the biggest hardware outlet here in Australia. Just trying to get that to focus. It also didn't cure, and it trying to get that to focus. It left a sticky residue that I showed in this video. I'm going to try and get to the bottom of this problem. Just demonstrate once again what we're talking about. Okay. I'm putting this on the end of the video because I don't want to release any confusing or wrong information. What I'll do is I'll do a test here on these pieces of pipe. The important thing is that there's a thread there. It doesn't really matter what it is.
This is plumbing pipe, this is copper, and this is a different type of material, so I'll apply this type to this and this type to this one here. Where the confusion may lay with this thread sealant is that it could only seal and dry in the thread, and anything outside of the thread could still become uncured. But anyway, let's do this simple test and get to the bottom of it. So I'll just apply around the edge there. They say that not much has to be used. Okay. So that's probably too much, but anyway, I'll thread that on. It's got the same bead coming out of the top there. Okay, we'll put that down there and I'll tighten that up. Okay, I'll put a bit of pressure on those threads. Okay, in the vise now. Okay, let's test one. Okay, the next test. Permatex. This does have a Canadian cancer warning on it. As an ex-resident of Toronto, okay, put a good amount of that around the sealant. Similar to the fuel pump. As I say, the directions did say that you did have to knead this. Okay, that must have sounded terrible. Okay, so kneading is when you just, that's kneading. If I put the cap on, so kneading is pushing in and around on the, just to mix up the contents inside, like a dough. That's kneading. Okay, so that's been kneaded, and I'll just put this on. Okay, that can't be tightened up. That's not a good test. Okay, that's a better test. So we've got a compression fitting here. I really don't understand this this cap system. This has got a hole in it, so you're supposed to put that one on, then this one, and of course once you use it, that's all messed up and you can't use it again, unless it's designed not to cure, not to go hard. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, well, that's it. That's the test. And we'll come back next week. Today is Monday, Australia Day, and we'll come back on probably Saturday. So that's roughly 5 days from now, and we'll pull them apart. If it's cured and hard and sealed on the inside of the thread, but not the outside, then we'll say that this stuff works. So until then. However, if it doesn't work, then what that means is essentially this stuff is nothing more than just a type of grease. I did do a test with silicone, and I've got a piece of silicon, and it was cured. I put it in a bowl of fuel, bowl of petrol or gasoline, and it was affected by the gasoline. So the gasoline will destroy silicon. Okay, it's now 2 days later, and let's go and put this in the vise and see what's happened. Okay, this is a thread sealant that goes hard, so that's good. The thread sealant outside of the thread trying to pick that up, as it's also cured. So in time on this, when it's in contact with metal, it is also cured, gone hard. So just trying to keep that on the video. Yep, that's a thread sealant. Okay, I'm beginning to see how this stuff works now. Okay, this is the other sort. Okay, that thread had been tightened. Let's have a look and see if the thread sealant has gone off. No, it's still in its liquid form. Okay. Let's have a look and see if it's gone hard around the threads. I don't think it's gone hard somehow. It's turning exceptionally easy. Okay, let's try and see. I don't think that's cured. Let's try that again. Okay, and as you see, it's nothing but a grease, type of grease. Okay, here's the other experiment. I did mock up another experiment here, and I wiped off the excess, and this will be the same. It'll just prove the same thing.
Okay, so why would a business make a non-sealing thread sealant? There's a few reasons. First reason is that you can put your fuel pump together, put your thread sealant on it. Maybe a mechanic will put it straight onto a vehicle, start it up, and then this gets into the carburetor or fuel injection system, or carburetor in this case. And then he starts it up, and it clogs up all the jets in the carburetor. That could have happened. They could have got sued or in trouble, and so they've gone back to just making a grease. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is politics. Another thing is profit. So a business can make something that doesn't work on purpose, and what happens is they make a profit by, so you buy it and then you realise it doesn't work, and then you buy something else and it makes the industry money. So this is obviously false advertising. It's not a sealant. If it was a sealant, it would cure and go hard amongst the threads. This is the thread sealant that did work. I got it from a hardware store, but you would have to, I don't know, you'd have to do an experiment. I'm guessing you'd have to put it in the threads, you'd have to let it cure, then take expose the threads, take the nut off, and then put it in fuel and just see if it dissolves. Okay, this is a few notes I made a couple of days ago before this diagnosis. I'm thinking that this type of thread sealant was probably originally a hardening agent, so it went hard amongst the threads, and then it turned into a type of grease so that you could reassemble unassemble and reassemble the threads if the work changed anywhere. But there and again, I mean, if you think about it, the outside thread could be, you could use a wire brush. But yeah, the inside thread, be hard to get out of that, and it'd probably push into the plumbing. This thread grease will dissolve with acetone, to a lesser degree with methylated spirits, and to a lesser degree again with fuel that you put in your car. Trying to focus that, so I'll be able to see that brush is now clean. But I've already decided what I'm going to do with these threads. So I'll clean that up. So I'm not using any paper towel for this, I'm using a rag. First of all, I'll wipe it. And I'll wipe this off, just making sure that I don't push it into the inlet there. And now I'll do the threads. Okay, it wants to be back back from the edge, because you don't want any of it getting inside the plumbing on this one, that's for sure. Okay, so that's now ready to okay, it might be a bit hard to believe for those who are outside of the industry, but this 454 was done up, you could say, a fair while ago, and it's actually still wet. If I get this in there, you can see, I'll just demonstrate, just get that focused a bit, and that's still wet. So okay, for whatever reason, that stuff's not supposed to cure at all. It's just supposed to be in between the threads. Okay, for a sealable thread seal, you can use something like this Loctite 577. That stands to reason because Loctite is a hardening compound or agent. I recommend looking up this video, Loctite 577, how to use, on Alan Hart channel. But remember, if you use this type of sealant, you won't be able to undo it. As in, if you undo it, the thread will be on the inside of the fuel pump, and it'll be hardened, so it'll be very hard to get off, and you may push some into the thread, so you'd want to be sure before you use that type of